Okay, Mr. Chair, we're live.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to today's work session. I'm delighted to be with you today. We are going to refer back to Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 for our discussion. I'm really gratified that Joe Manco, who many of you have met before, will be our lead person today for both of those pillars. And thank you, Joe, for all the hard work that you provided for us over the last several months. And we're going to go a little bit off script for just one moment because I think we need to recognize a little bit of the work that we've done in the past. You had the pillars in all of the drafts that we've had before in the charts, and there may be a little bit of confusion about what will the comprehensive plan look like and what it would consist of. In many ways, the information that we've been working on for the past several months constitutes a substantial part of what we hope will be the comprehensive plan. There will be some things that we will have to add to it, providing some meat onto the organizational charts that you see, but the questions and the outlines that you see are essentially a good part of what we would ultimately conclude, hopefully, for our December 2nd final presentation. It is important for you to know that because the work that you provided will help us to ensure that ultimately we have a product that reflects our conversations, the analysis that we'll have, and your input. And we received a great deal of input over the last several months, and I want to thank all of you for the work that you provided. I know it is difficult, especially when you're dealing with this in the months of July and August with your families, trying to find time to schedule vacation time and do everything else that you need to do. It has been a great deal. With that in mind, I want to thank Rachel Heiss and her entire staff for the work that they've performed. They've performed this work with a limited staff up to this point in time. So my hat is off to you, Rachel, and for all the work that you've done. Joe, why don't you let us know from the advisory committee who's here with us today, and then I can't see the screen, but I want to know also all of the members of the AIB board who's here as well, Rich. Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 5 members of the advisory committee that are registered for the meeting today. So I want to thank Kara Burhans, John Silkey, David Harper, Gina Hoover, and Jaden Ferris, who have all registered for the meeting and are in attendance today. And then in addition, thank you to all of the advisory committees that committee members that are attending and listening in that may not have been registered.
Thank you. Rachel, who do we have from the board itself?
In addition to you and Mr. Manco, we have Dr. Doss, Dr. Kerwin, and Dr. Stapleton.
Okay, thank you. Could you, for a moment or two, do 2 things for me? One, probably do another explanation of the charts before us so that people clearly understand what they are looking at. People may have forgotten how to follow this through. And then also give some outline in terms of the dates and times for which we will complete or at least have an outline about the process going forward so that people will be very clear about the time, their participation, and what we hope to do in the months or so ahead of us.
Sure, absolutely. So today, this is the 3rd round of working sessions that we've held over the summer. And we're just getting in under the wire here in the summer. And excuse me. For this final round of these working sessions, we are going to be reviewing the implementation graphics that we've been sharing at each of the meetings and walking through. We have revised those graphics based on both feedback and input from the working sessions and also just digging in a little deeper to the law and the intent of the blueprint and adding things in. So for both Pillar 1 and Pillar 2, we will be going through those graphics again. And as the chair just discussed, those graphics themselves will form a key component of the comprehensive plan. that the AIB will be adopting a draft version around the middle of October, and that will be shared publicly for public review and comment. There will be a public hearing in November after the election day, and we'll be announcing the exact day and times shortly. And then the final comprehensive plan will be adopted by the board by December 1st. So the idea is we have this next set of working sessions, and then we take whatever feedback we get and whatever additional work that needs to be done and revise it again, and then put that out in the middle of October for review and comment. And then we're going to probably allow for comment both through the feedback forum that we've been using, and also at that public hearing that will be held in November. With then the plan to finalize it by December 1st, which is the statutory date.
Repeat again when you anticipate we'll have a draft plan so that people, the general public, have an opportunity to weigh in on that.
Yeah, so
approximately.
Yes, middle of October. So the AIB, the board, the full board has a meeting on September 29th. And then there is another meeting on October 13th of the full board. And the intent is that at the October 13th meeting, the board would be reviewing another revised version of the pillar implementation graphics, along with some other components that will need to be in the plan on the meeting on the 13th. And then after that, staff would make any changes that the board requests to be made. And then that document would be released for the public review and comment. So mid-October, the 13th is a Thursday. So probably ideally by that Monday, which is the 17th, I think.
I want to go back just one moment on the chart so that people understand what we have with the different colors and the diagrams that you have here. Could you just simply highlight that again so people fully follow us through today on that?
Absolutely. Emma, could you put up the Pillar 1 graphic, please? Okay, so this is that implementation graphic for Pillar 1, and we'll start just right at the top there. What we've done is the legend there shows the timeline is to the right, and it begins in fiscal 22, which is considered the baseline year, although some provisions of the blueprint were already in effect in fiscal 22, and then it goes out to fiscal 32, which is the under the blueprint statute, the final year that the AIB is in existence. And then you can see there are stars that represent deadlines that are actually in the blueprint law. And then if yellow dots represent dates that are not specifically in the law, but are either part of the commission's report or otherwise part of the intent of the blueprint. In addition to that, there are some additional items that have been added that will also have yellow markers that indicate dates. On the left, for Pillar 1, which is early childhood education, the first item, which is 1.1, that is considered an objective. So that is objective 1.1 of Pillar 1, which is to expand publicly funded full day pre-K. And that is in the darker green. And then below that are tasks and then subtasks that are specified in the law or that have come up in feedback that are needed in order to implement that objective or achieve that objective.
Okay.
And so you can see the gradation of green. So the dark green is the objective. The next slightly lighter color is the task, and then the lighter color are subtasks. Excuse me.
Okay.
You also see that there are items that are now in white. The white items reflect changes that were made to the pillar graphic since the last version, since the last working session on the pillar. So these were provisions that were added either as a result of feedback from the working sessions or by staff just as we dug further into the statute and the commission report and the intent of the blueprint to try to really incorporate anything or everything that we want to make sure is clear to everyone who will have to submit an implementation plan that is aligned with the comprehensive plan, what exactly they're being asked to do, and also so that it's clear to the public what the expectations are in terms of what all the entities will need to do to implement the blueprint.
Okay. Let me just give another warning again for those who've contacted me outside of this process, and that I've urged you to make certain that whatever questions or concerns you have, to facilitate them through the staff and to Rachel and others. But also keep in mind that, as I stated at the beginning of this process, we are not relitigating the blueprint. And we have gone through an exhaustive legislative process that took years. This is not to suggest that we're not open to possible changes or adjustments, but they would have to be very strongly made and something that we would have to look at very seriously. So the idea now is to see how we can move forward with the blueprint that has been adopted by the General Assembly and presumed to have the kind of go-ahead for the public at large. If there are some serious problems or concerns that we need to address, certainly we will look at that, but we would have to have a very strong case to demonstrate why the adjustment needs to be made. With that, Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to Joe for any comments, and we'll immediately go into Pillar 1, unless there are some additional comments from the staff as well. Joe?
You're muted, Joe.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, just one question, Rachel. If I was an LEA, currently that is looking at these implementation graphics, like what do you think is the best way for us to kind of engage or be thinking about what our next steps are at this point in order to be strategic and thoughtful about what has been presented thus far and how to engage moving forward?
That's an excellent question. And I think I will say that we are providing the pillar graphics right now as a PDF. We've been asked to provide it as an Excel document, and we will do that when we release the draft plan in October, so that everyone is able to, so you don't have to retype things and you can, manipulate it. So I think the idea is for the LEAs and the other entities who will need to submit implementation plans to the AIB, that they will need to go through and essentially provide a plan or some narrative and data around each of the objectives that they play a part in implementing. And one component of the comprehensive plan is obviously going to be providing some guidance to LEAs and others who will have to submit implementation plans around what their plans need to include. We are working on that now. Staff is working on that now. And we will potentially have some of that draft available at the 29th and or the 13th for discussion among the board members. And then that'll be open to public comment, review and comment as well. But I think the graphics, while they do look different this time than they did the last version, because they have a lot more detail in them, and that's what we were trying to do. You know, hopefully at this point we've captured, you know, nearly everything that we need to capture in the pillar graphics to describe the timelines and the tasks that need to be implemented. But I think the other piece of it is not just thinking about it as needing to implement all these various individual strategy implementation objectives and strategies and tasks and subtasks, but actually like the strategic thinking around how the LEAs are going to approach implementing these various components in a systemic way. And it really is going to require, I think, as LEAs have been doing more thinking about actually sort of how they're going to implement pieces of the blueprint, they're realizing, and I've been in some meetings, they're realizing that they're really going to have to do things differently or rethink how they're doing things. In some cases, they might be very much on the right track, but in other cases, they might really need to rethink how they're allocating resources, both funding and personnel resources, in order to be able to achieve what the blueprint is intending as the outcomes. And that is the other piece that we will also be sharing in the draft comprehensive plan, would be the intended outcomes of the blueprint, both at the system level and then by pillar and ultimately by objective. And so, you know, I think it's a combination of the graph, you know, really the detail, but also in the graphics that really lay out what specifically and explicitly needs to be done, but the more strategic thinking around how to do that. And that is, I think, one of the places where the AIB and MSDE could be helpful to provide technical assistance around really strategic thinking and, you know, landscape scans around where you are, where you're starting from, and where you're trying to get to, and how to make it all happen.
There's a question in the chat from D Shorts, and it says, will there be a template provided to LEAs?
That is another excellent question, and we're actually thinking that through right now. MSDE has developed a draft template that as one possibility. I think that we're definitely going to provide, so the statute requires us to provide minimum guidelines for what the plans need to include. And that will actually be what the release of funding in fiscal 23 will be based on. So there will definitely be guidance and guidelines around what should be in the plans. Whether it's a full-on template or not, I can't say at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Understood.
But it could be.
Great.
So should we?
Yeah, let's go ahead and just start it into the individual components and start with 101.1 and follow and work down.
Okay. So let me just say, I think we've pretty much covered this, but you can see on the slide that, so for these meetings for pillars 1 and 2, what we're going to go through is the revised graphics. We're going to identify what's been added as a result of feedback. We're also we've identified ongoing, what we're calling implementation considerations that have been raised or that that, we're already, we're very obvious things that need to be monitored. Then lastly, we want to talk about technical assistance and identifying topics for technical assistance that would be helpful for the LEAs, but also all of the different entities that are going to be implementing the blueprint. And so that we can actually, I think we'd like to start, MSD and AIB would like to start providing technical assistance, this fall, prior to even the release of the final comprehensive plan. So then, Emma, if you could please put the, oh, thank you. We're going to just follow the same protocols that we have in all the other meetings. So just as a reminder, please put your questions or comments in the chat box, and Joe will be monitoring that while I'm talking, and then we'll swap. And then if, we'll ask you to come off camera and explain if that's helpful.
Yeah, and Rachel, on the question of the plan and templates, there's 2 questions that are in the chat. And maybe we'll ask Barbara to maybe come off a mute and provide some more context to her question. She says MSD has many changes going on. How do we follow this and contacts? So I don't, if you could maybe provide some more clarity, and then, I guess Rachel or one of the board members could respond in kind.
Yeah, I'm here. There's been a lot of changes at MSDE. We just lost Stephen, lost the officer of director of childcare. So those positions are vacant right now. So I just was trying to understand, as we're going through processes, who would be the contact that we would connect to.
Very good. Excellent question.
Is Mike Hirschenfeld on?
Rachel.
Hey, Mike. I'm going to let you take
Sure.
this one.
Yeah, I think in these scenarios where there's turnover for folks who are leading different blueprint program areas, it probably makes the most sense to send those questions to me so that I can hunt down the right person and make sure that we're being able to provide guidance and responses to questions in the interim while we're still filling those vacant positions.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Yeah, and I'll put my email address in the chat window here, and AIB, please feel free to share it with anybody as well.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And
Thanks, Mike.
I would also just suggest, if you're an LEA, if you're with an LEA, to share your questions with your blueprint coordinator. They've got a very they have a process going where questions are being shared with MSD and AIB staff, and we're trying to work our way through them. So that would also be a really good way of getting your questions to bubble up to the surface.
Yeah. And then before we move into pillar 1, I wanted to surface Buzzy's question just around, either MSD or AIB providing more specific guidelines or mandates for uniform data necessary for evaluation. If you want to talk a little bit to that question.
Sure. I absolutely, there will be, there needs to be guidance for the implementation plans that make, to ensure that, particularly related to data, and the timelines are in the graphic, but related to data and other things, that we're getting uniform data, absolutely, as we're looking at both baseline data and progress data over time. So yes, I agree that we definitely need to make sure that there is enough guidance, specific guidance, that the LEA, the information is consistent where it needs to be. Absolutely. So then I think we can go to the pillar graphic. And so I'm gonna put this on my other screen because I can't see. Okay. So starting at the top, as the chair said, so starting at the top, and this is where I was sort of started out with giving an example of how to read the graphic, the implementation graphic. I noted that as the items that are in white, that have a white background, are new to this version of the graphic, the implementation graphic. And so you can see under pillar objective 1.1, which is expanding publicly funded full day pre-K. And then under the first task, which is expanding access to free full day pre-K for the low income 3 and 4-year-olds. There is a new item under 1.1.1b that is based on feedback that was received, questions that were asked at earlier Pillar 1 sessions around whether LEAs and providers would be funded for the pre-K students who don't meet the low income requirements, but who are required by statute to be a priority for the tier 1, which is the first tier of students, that eligible students that are counted in the funding formula. And so as a result of that question and looking back in the law, we are recommending a technical correction to the law that would include students with disabilities, English language students, or students where a language other than English is the primary language spoken in their home, and homeless students who are most likely to already be covered under the low income definition, but particularly for the students with disabilities and English, not the primary language students, that they would be counted in the funding formula immediately now. So that will require a statutory change to the law. And then it would, depending on how that is implemented, it potentially could, there could be a deficiency appropriation to apply for fiscal 23, or else it may just take effect beginning in fiscal 24. Those are some details that will need to be worked out, but we wanted to include this in the plan so that it was very clear that there was a correction needed. And this recommendation will be part of the annual report that the AIB will be submitting to the Governor and General Assembly, that where recommendations for legislative consideration are included in that annual report. This will be the first annual report. And I'm looking in the chat, I see this question about whether the latest version of the graphics are posted on the website. Yes, and I'm going to ask Graham if he could put a link in the chat that includes where the meeting materials are posted so that folks can download the graphic.
Absolutely. I'll do that in one moment here.
Yep, thank you. Do we want to, should I keep going, or I see Janine has a question?
Yes, unless you have additional questions. Any question, Joe?
Yeah, Janine elevated a question. Does that mean that the FARMS form only can be used to screen special students with special education services and used as a proxy for family income and identification of tier assignment?
Janine, I'm going to ask you to, if you could come on camera and explain that question a little more for me.
Okay, I don't think I can turn my camera.
No, that's okay. You don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is that there's a September 30 report that's submitted to MSD each year, and it gives all the information about pre-K students. And we know that students with disabilities are also a priority in terms of finding spaces for them in pre-K and trying to increase mainstreaming and least restrictive environment. So now we've been asked by MSDE to use income verification for all of the special education preschool students who are full day, which means that if a parent has a child with a disability and they qualify for preschool special ed, now we're asking the parent to submit a W-2 and their taxes and all of this information to be able to determine which tier, the household income and all of that. And it's coming with very short notice. And we've got to be able to maintain relationships with our parents and explain to them why we need the data. And so the question really is, can't we, for this year, use the farms form as a proxy? Because if the parent fills it out, we'll be able to determine the numbers in the home, the household income, and then we can assign them a tier. We'll know if they're income eligible or not just using the farms form. But by, in the short amount of time, asking the parents to turn in all this income verification data is, I think it's burdensome to the parents. It's taxing on the parents. And I understand why we're doing it. We need to have some data, but do we need to have the full income verification process for this year, since it was kind of short notice? So that's my question. I just don't want to, I want that to be able to have time to explain to those parents why we're doing it. And some may or may not agree, but we also don't want to be excluded from the funding either, but it's kind of short notice.
Is your comment
from what we have
will undermine, I have an unavoided consequences here of really reducing the number of kids to participate?
Perhaps it could, or I think it could result in some upset parents who want to know, why is it that you're asking me for this data when my child has an IEP and they therefore qualify? Why are you asking me for this income data? So I think it would be, it's a step forward to ask them to complete the farms form, but it seems to me that that's sufficient to get the information that we need. By pushing further just for this year to try to gather all that data, it just seems like it's burdensome to the parents, and it may cause some issues.
Right, I got it. Thank you.
Building relationships with the parents.
You have anything to add to that, Rachel?
I don't know if Justin is on today. If Justin, if you are, please feel free to.
He's not, Rachel, sorry.
Okay, all right, then. So this is something that MSDE has asked the LEAs to provide starting this fall in order to be able to have an accurate count of students that should go in the enrollment count on September 30th. And there really is no other way to get that data other than to ask the parents for it. So, the recommendation to adjust the funding formula so that those students are counted in the formula does not change the fact that we do need to know the family's income level.
Can't we get that from the farms form? Because you fill out the number of people and the names of those in the household and your household income. So you can determine a tier by using the farms form. I guess that was really my question for this year.
See. Okay.
To exceed that and ask them for all of their forms when we can really get the information we need from the farms form. It lists all the members of the household, it lists the household income, and therefore you can see, like, there are 6 people and with a household income of this, there are 4 people in the family. So you can really determine what tier. You'll know if they're 300% of federal poverty level or 300 to 600%. It's just that in a short span of time, to now ask the parents to turn in all that data and create a process around it for preschool special ed, when that isn't a group that we traditionally ask for income requirements from. So I guess we were just wondering if the farms form could be used for that group just for this year, and give us some time to actually develop a process for the preschool special ed, because I know that the state wants to really the purpose is to get a profile of all of our pre-K students and to take a look at, how many of them may be income eligible. So I understand the purpose behind it. It's just more of a implementation piece.
Rachel, why don't we take that under consideration and see whether or not there's something else that the state may want, and reason as to why.
Yep.
What is laid out seems pretty reasonable, but if there's some way in which we can accommodate what she's talking about, it could have some adverse consequences. we should try to avoid that. But we'll look at that. And
Okay, thank you so much for any consideration.
Yes,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yes.
Shamoya has also said or asked if the comptroller's office can provide tax data for eligible families.
So that's something that we need to explore. It is tax information is confidential, and so it's not that simple. But there has been some discussion in the past about whether there could be a way to use comptroller's office data and not have to ask parents to provide all the documentation. So
And we know, like, through the regular pre-K process, if a family comes and they're eligible for food stamps or eligible for Medicaid, those are pretty much indicators. So we know that, they're going to fall in that income range. But for some of the other parents who qualify through having an IEP, they really haven't been involved in an income process, a verification process for services.
Right. No, I understand, Janine. We'll look at that. We'll talk with MSDE about that.
All right. Should we continue? Should we continue on with the graphic, Rachel?
Absolutely. And so I'm not going to read it all to you because you can all download the graphic and it's probably very small on your screen also. But note that under 1.1C, there are a couple of new additions that relate to utilizing existing available space that might be available in public buildings. And then below that is something
With your
Girl, I didn't think of it.
come up in several meetings around potentially LEAs leasing commercial space to meet the space needs, particularly given some providers that have gone out of business. There is, because the space has to be very, they have special requirements for childcare spaces, and there might be available space now out in the real estate market. And then in many of these cases, what's been added is as a result of the feedback of all of you that have been participating in the meetings. And I think what I would like to do that I think would probably be more efficient is if we go back to the slide deck and we've actually identified what we've added that is specifically related to the feedback from you all. And then we could, if there are questions around other elements that were added, please feel free to put them in the chat box. So, so under 1.1, which is the objective that we've been talking about, there's been a task has been added for MSDE to, and this really relates to the various funding supports and stipends that are available for to help upskill staff, both to meet the new teacher certification requirement for the classroom teacher, the teaching assistant requirement, and also Excel's accreditation requirements and credentialing. And so there are several pots of money that are provided in the blueprint to support those processes. And we just added that we want to ask MSDE to make sure that all those available funds are being utilized as best that they can be. And then also to ask MSDE and the LEAs to share information with the private providers about the salary increases for staff that are associated with the new upskilled requirements. So while we are asking staff to become more qualified in order to participate in the publicly funded program, we are providing funding to help do that. And also they will earn more money if their provider is able to participate in the publicly funded system. And similar to that is asking MSDE, and I guess we could put the LEAs here too, to share information with teachers and teaching assistants, both in their public settings and in the private providers, about what the new requirements are and the alternative pathways that are available to help them meet the new requirements. I talked about the next one, which relates to the technical correction to the funding formula. Below that is MSD and LEAs share information about available pre-K options with eligible families. So this is really making sure that the information is out there for parents to know that their child is eligible for, at least right now, free full day pre-K. And so that, you know, we're making sure that those kids have the opportunity to enroll. The next item is a big one, and this relates to the enrollment system that is going to be used by the LEAs to take in the requests from families and parents for both the public and a private setting, because the statute does say that parents are allowed to express a preference about where their child is going to attend pre-K. And, you know, there's been a lot of discussion in various meetings about having a centralized enrollment system that is really accessible and easy for families to sign up their kids. You know, whether that would be at every single elementary school and provider, or, you know, a designated set of them that are around the jurisdiction so that it's convenient for parents. That's part of the discussion that needs to occur, as well as whether there will be a statewide system that MSDE would host. And I know that there have been some beginnings of conversations about that. And that was something that the commission talked about, that it would be, because right now we do have the statewide childcare scholarship system that MSDE runs. So it could sort of be built off of that, was the thinking back when the Kerwin Commission was talking about these recommendations, or whether each LEA will have their own system. And then the next item really relates to making sure that the message gets out to private providers who we really want and need to participate in this mixed delivery system in order to be able to serve all the students that we want to serve, that they are aware of the financial benefits of participating and how they could, you know, how they could structure their business model to really take advantage of that. And I think here that would be MSD, but it would also be, and we'll get into this with technical assistance, you know, with talking with their colleagues, because we've heard in some meetings some examples of private providers who have been able to make it work and really flourish. And so whether those kinds of models are replicable. And then the last item relates to a provision in the statute that essentially says that the salaries and benefits for private providers, staff at private providers, need to be comparable to the salaries and benefits of the public schools. And that's something that, you know, at some point needs to be really fleshed out what that means specifically. Are there any other?
For insurance?
Say that again?
What is the mechanism for ensuring that?
That's another question. I mean, I think that would be part of the implementation plans that are submitted and the MOUs between the pre-K private providers and the LEAs, where they would need to demonstrate that that the salaries that are being provided to the private provider staff are comparable. Both the salaries and the benefits are comparable. Is that everything for 1.1, Emma, or is there more on the next slide? think that's everything.
Yeah, that's everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it looks like we're ready to move on then to 1.2, unless there's any other questions. I'll maybe we'll go on to 1.2, and I'm going to read through what Christina just added to the chat.
Okay, fab. So Emma, if you, great. So then 1.2, objective 1.2 is student readiness for kindergarten, and the kindergarten readiness assessment is Maryland's tool to do that. And a couple of provisions have been added to that based on discussions at the previous working sessions. The first is to really make sure that educators who are administering the KRA have received professional development and training and have all the necessary supports to administer the KRA effectively and, you know, as it needs to be done. And then the second item relates to the statute says that the KRA will be unbiased. And at the last meeting, I think MSCE and faculty at Johns Hopkins talked about a report that they had done back in 2019. And what this is saying is that the current assessment that is being used this year should be, formally evaluated for bias and to determine that there is no bias, and also to look at any potential bias that could exist in the actual administration of the KRA. So it may not be the assessment tool itself, but it may also be possible that bias is introduced during the administration of the assessment. So just to look at that, and then we would need to come up with a timeline for when that would be completed. But ideally it would be before the next administration of the KRA. And then,
no,
go ahead.
You go ahead, Rachel. Finish your thought.
The last item, I'll just cover the last item here, is objective 1.3, which is expanding the family supports both around the Judy centers and the Patty centers. And we've added that MSDE should develop a plan for the coordinated and equitable placement of Judy and Patty centers. So to make sure that because they kind of, the two centers are where they're located or awarded is they're separate processes. And so the idea here is to make sure that since we do have these two centers, that we make sure that throughout the state, the high need communities that need these services are, at least able to access them through one or the other, if not both. And there are, a number of counties that don't have these centers currently.
Rachel, there's some comments in the chat that really go back to 1.1. And I'm gonna ask Christina to come off of mute and just explain her comment a little bit more. I think just a concern and something that we need to take into account and figure out if there's something that we can do to try to address this. So Christina, could you come off chat and share your comment?
Sure. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, my comment was related to the great initiative that Maryland has funded in this blueprint, and even prior to the ability to achieve your college education and receive more compensation to be a public pre-K teacher. The problem is the issue that we have is the opportunities to complete the coursework are great. It's the residency requirements for alternative preparation. It requires a provider to leave their job as a community-based program and go into the public school or non-public school to participate in residency to meet the law unless they're already certified. And then if they're not, they have to compete to find teachers, which we know there's a huge teacher shortage and issue. So we can't just take someone with a bachelor's degree and working towards their certification because it has to be done, the residency has to be done in a public setting. And actually, I believe it says K from kindergarten up, not even a public pre-K. And then I think Dana also makes a great point as well. There's these are barriers that we really need to address with regard to a true mixed delivery system, because the way that it is reading now, we cannot do that, as we're never going to meet those minimum, even though we have plenty of providers that are levels 3, 4, and 5 excels, even though we have many childcare programs and providers that have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees that we have data from MSDE on, because we have to provide that to licensing and credentialing. We have the workforce structure. We just cannot go any further to participate. So those are some of the barriers. I don't know if Dana if you want to read Dana's as well. We can't compete with benefits if we don't have more than 50 kids. I mean, there's a lot of barriers here that we need to consider to have a true mixed delivery system.
So let me just start with what you were saying, Christina, in the beginning around the residency requirement. And that is actually an excellent point, and definitely a barrier. And I think, Emma, if we go to the 2 slides ahead, this is one of the so the first set of things we talked about are specific things that were added to the graphic that reflect the feedback that literally were added to essentially the comprehensive plan. This slide now is the ongoing considerations, implementation considerations. Some of them are definitely obstacles, barriers, whatever we want to call them, that will need to be monitored as the implementation begins, and there may need to be adjustments to the plan, to the law, if these obstacles are not overcome. And part of overcoming the obstacles is the role of AIB and MSDE and others in providing technical assistance, and also, helping to facilitate successful implementation of the blueprint. And so one of those is the need for additional alternative certification pathways for teachers and for teaching assistants, so that they can meet the requirements in the law. And specifically on the residency requirement for, or what we call the practicum in Pillar 2, the practicum requirement for certified teachers, I believe that there is a new program that is about to launch at Montgomery College that is designed to, and they've been working with MSDE to design a program that would allow for the provider to be the pre-K provider to be the K, for lack of a bit, the partner school to meet the practicum requirement. And I just learned about this new program recently, and we were actually talking with MSDE staff about it just yesterday, around whether that model, it could be replicated at other community colleges around the state. And again, it's just starting this fall, I believe, so it's brand new.
Yeah, I've been working with Dr. Perneta Hernandez on that for a while. So that is something we wanted to bring forth last year, and it's taking it, it's a good program. It has to be replicated, or we won't have enough.
Exactly. That's my feeling as well. We have to be able to replicate it.
Correct.
Yep, exactly. And so I think that's a really good, hopefully that's a good model for replicating. Speaking for the board, we're going to do whatever we can do to facilitate these kinds of innovations and partnerships, working with MSDE, working with the providers, working with every higher education. I think the AIB is kind of well placed to be able to kind of bring groups together and work through things. And that is exactly what we're intending to do. When we talk about technical assistance, that's partly what we mean by that, is really, and maybe we should call it implementation assistance. I don't know. But anyway, some of it will be bringing in experts who can really help to sort of bring new thinking, but all other pieces of the technical assistance is really just convening folks to talk about potential models that could be successful and then how we can replicate them.
Very good. Yeah, thank you so much for your engagement on that, Christina, and for elevating that issue. And then I also wanted to bring up Dana's question just around providers with less than 50 employees that are having a hard time matching the benefits that LEAs are able to get for their employees.
Yeah, this is another that's definitely an issue, and thinking about what how to make that happen. I mean, I can think of a couple of things, but I don't necessarily want to sort of throw them out here. But I definitely think we need to work on that, and how the private providers can try to meet this requirement of the law.
Mm-hmm. Got it. I think similarly related is the question that just got added to the chat from Lisa Bushi. The challenge with, or actually, no, it's the, sorry. No, it's the challenge that was elevated by Kim Richiche. One barrier that's being overlooked is that four-year-old children carry community-based centers financially. With all the four-year-old children going to free pre-K programs at the LEAs, community-based centers will be struggling to financially stay afloat. And now we will be asked to provide pay and benefits commensurate with the LEAs. Where are the community-based centers going to find this financial help?
So let's see, let me break this down. Okay. So we're definitely, this was an issue that was discussed in the commission quite a bit. And also not just 4-year-olds, but 3-year-olds as well, I think. And the funding formula that is funding the full day pre-K programs recognizes the full cost of providing the high quality pre-K, whether in a public or a private setting, and provides that funding for each child to the provider, whether they're a public provider or a private provider. So I wouldn't say all the 4-year-old children are going to LEAs. They certainly, private providers can also enroll 4-year-old children now, for who are, the children are going for free, but the provider is receiving the full per student funding for that child. So and the funding formula was estimated based on the cost of quality, which included salaries and benefits that were essentially the average of what the LEAs were paying. So the funding that's being provided by the state and county governments to support the full day pre-K program, at least in theory, on paper, should be enough to provide those salaries and benefits to the staff.
There's a question on the KRA in the chat from Shamoya. Is there a framework for assessing bias in the KRA? No, that's something that MSDE was working on. So I don't know if Mike has the response or if you have some insight on that, Rachel.
I do not. That would be part of the, I mean, I'm assuming that there would be an outside study done. And so normally in the state, you would identify the framework that either you would identify the framework that should be used, or the you put out an RFP and the vendors or the faculty or whoever would propose a framework for how they would do the assessment. And so we weren't thinking that we would specify that in the plan, but we could if there was an agreement on what framework should be used.
Rachel?
Yes.
I recently came across something, email or something that sent out a report. I believe there has been an assessment of the kindergarten readiness assessments by Johns Hopkins. I think they were under,
yes,
they had some sort of grant to do that. Am I remembering correctly?
Yes, it was done back in 2019.
2019.
Yeah, and what we're suggesting is that there be another one.
Yeah.
Based on the current version of the KRA.
Yeah.
And that it be look at both the assessment tool itself, but also whether there's any potential bias that could creep in during the administration.
Yeah, I mean, but the fact that it has been done means that, it could be done again. And as you're suggesting, it probably should be.
I guess another question raised, or just a comment that was put in the chat by Dana, just on, really, she says the amount allocated to pay for the child may cover the teacher and teacher financial parts, but it's not enough to cover the rest of the cost of running a high quality program. It would need to be in excess of $15,000 per pupil, not the $10,000 being paid.
So the formula phases in over time. And so it is at about 10,000, I think. It phases up to almost 20,000. So per student, $19,526 comes to mind. And so we may need to think about calibrating the comparable benefit requirement to the phase in of the formula, because it is phased in over time. That is a fair point. But it does go actually well above 15,000 when it's fully phased in. And I also wanted to, I see Tracy Broccolino had a question about the funding mechanism, and I want to address that one too. And so her question is that private providers are funded through grants and LEAs are funded through funding formulas, but that's actually not correct. There are two ways that private providers can participate in the full day program right now. One is through the pre-K expansion grant program, which has been in existence for, I think, since 2015, and continues sort of as a way for MSDE provides grants to both, it could be public providers and private providers to convert half-day slots to full-day slots, and then also to start up new programs. And so it provides some flexibility that's beyond just the full-day pre-K funding formula. But private providers can absolutely participate through an MOU with an LEA in the funding formula process that would provide the per pupil amount to the private provider. And for special education students that are enrolled with that private provider, the special education funding associated with that student should also flow to the private provider. And if that's not clear, please Does that answer your question, Tracy? Because I think that's a really important question, so I want to make sure that's clear. Yes, thank you. Not sure LEAs know that. I hope they did, but they do now. And MOU is a memorandum of understanding, and LEA is a local education agency, or that's another name for a school system, a public school system.
Mhm.
And apologies for all the acronyms.
Yeah. For all the acronyms, and then also thank you for so many people in the chat that are going through and sharing best practices, responding to each other's questions. Especially thanks to Janine and Christina and other folks that are really helping to support their colleagues. I wanted to also elevate the comment from Kim, because I think she provides a good kind of real world example of some challenges that are being faced by childcare providers in Washington County. So, I think maybe just to elevate that for the staff and make sure that we have that comment logged so that we can go back and review that and maybe do some outreach.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And just to remember, we do download the chat transcripts for our own use, but we also post them so they're available for everyone. And let me also, if I can just, Christina Push had another comment that I wanted to kind of address related to, and she said this earlier, that, that the childcare providers do have a lot of, well-educated staff who just need some time to upskill and be able to meet the requirements under the blueprint. And then she says that the blueprint doesn't speak to provisional considerations. And I did just want to say that under the blueprint law, the requirement that teachers have a P3 certification, that private providers have a teacher with P3 certification and a teaching assistant with a CDA or an AA degree does not begin until the 25-26 school year. So the blueprint did build in a transition period for staff, so that staff could upskill. It was actually longer, but given the when we've been starting, we're a little behind, obviously, but there is a transition period before it's required under the blueprint.
Got it. Anything more, Rachel, on the ongoing considerations related to Pillar 1, or should we go to possible areas for technical assistance or maybe implementation assistance?
Yeah, we can, let me just, I think I'll just highlight some of them if,
Sure.
just to make sure, obviously the supply of certified teachers, both in P3 and special education, is an ongoing issue that is key to being able to expand full day pre-K the way that is intended. And we know that there are challenges for existing staff to upskill while they are still working in their current jobs, which we need them to be, because we need them doing keeping the kids and the childcare workers served now. Sorry, the students. So, just having everyone leave, and go to school for a year and a half is going to create a different problem that isn't helpful. And so the need to really find creative ways to offer pathways for upskilling while working and meeting the practicum requirement for the certified teachers is critical. And I know space is a big issue and something that we'll need to also be monitoring. And I think we've talked about everything else.
Okay. Question in the chat from Christina Miller. She says the blueprint states eligible private providers shall account for at least 30% of eligible pre-kindergarten providers in each county. How is that number calculated? Is each school that receives pre-K funding considered an eligible provider when determining 30%? Does the 30% only include those providers that are receiving state funds?
Well, before you answer that, I think the question should be, how do we get to 30%? What it is based on?
So what Christina is referring to is so we're building a mixed delivery system. We want public providers and private providers to participate in the system. And as was pointed out earlier in the chat, there was a big concern among the private providers that the public schools would essentially, end up basically taking a lot of the 3 and 4-year-olds that the private providers are served now and start serving them in the public schools, and that was a real threat to their business model. And so
yeah, Rachel, I understand that, but what I'm getting at the basis for why you would try to provide some transitional relief for the private providers, the fundamental question that I've had some challenge with is, how do we get to 30%? Why not as 40%, 50%, or 15%, or 10%? Where does the 30% come from?
So it is 50% ultimately, and it phases up from 30% in fiscal 23 to 50% in, I think, fiscal 26, but I'm trying to find it real quick. And so the commission had essentially recommended that, ultimately it should be a 50% public, 50% private mixed delivery system. Yeah. But that starting at 50% would be too difficult. And so what the commission recommended and then the law required is 30% of the slots would be with private providers in fiscal 23, phasing up to 50% by, I think it's fiscal 26. Emma, can you confirm that? Or
I understand, but here's my challenge with that, is that I understand the transition and the need to provide some potential relief there, but we're assuming that everything is equal across the entire state. And there are differences, major differences in different parts of the state, both in terms of space availability, in terms of distances, the number of students that are potentially available. And there are a lot of factors that go into that. And so as I look at this is one area where I think really requires some additional scrutiny and reevaluation, I think, ultimately for us. I don't think we have the answer for that right now, but if I would have to say that there's one thing that just sticks out to me in terms of potential adjustment, this is one of the areas that does so.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point that, it's very different in different regions of the state. And I'm just thinking about particularly in Western Maryland and the Eastern Shore, there are not nearly as many private providers, community providers, as there are in, the more central part of the state. Part of this could be how right now, the way the law is structured, each LEA has the opportunity to request a waiver from this 30%, from the requirement, the 30% up to 50%. And MSDE is responsible for granting the waivers. And the law specifically says, I guess we don't have it here. It specifically says that MSDE has to provide a waiver if there is not a sufficient supply of private providers in that county. And so in the short term, I think the waiver process will address this, but you're right, we may need to rethink whether it's able to be the same 50-50 mixed delivery in every jurisdiction, or if that's more a statewide goal and not for each county.
Right. Also, have there been any list of standards to meet, basically, for a waiver? Have they put anything out or intend to do so?
I know they intend to, I do recall talking with them about this. They have not yet, but they are aware of that they will need to do that. Essentially, we won't have the enrollment data to know how many pre-K kids are enrolled until after September 30th. So I think MSD thinking that the waiver process would come later in the fall or early winter.
Yeah, I think there may have been a question or comment that popped up on the screen. Joe, so may want to address that.
Yeah, I mean, Christina was just, I think, validating some of the challenges around the barriers for a true mixed delivery system. She says she thinks only 90 applications for public pre-K grants and only 1/3 of the 90 met the requirements. So, just adding some kind of specificity and detail to quantify the challenge. And then there's a comment that was just added by Kelly where it says Washington County is in the same boat with only one community provider this year. So yeah, definitely seeing challenges across the state, in particular on, in Western Maryland and on the Eastern Shore with, trying to stand up a true mixed delivery system.
And I will say that is why the waiver provision was put in the law, was, recognizing that it would be different in different parts of the state, but that still wanting to set the goal of a true 50-50 mixed delivery system.
Understand. There any other question on that, Joe? Now we can move on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going through the chat, but I think a lot of these are pretty similar, just reinforcing some of the challenges in various areas across the state. So definitely something that we have talked through, but also something that we the staff will go through and track, and we can start bucketing some of these comments and challenges, and
yeah,
put this on our radar of things that we want to continue to keep an eye on.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Emma, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is, we tried to sort of summarize into some, relatively big buckets, the types of technical assistance that that we thought would be helpful, and that has been suggested in feedback in previous sessions. And so the first is really to provide models and strategies for all the different types of providers to successfully participate in a mixed delivery system. And this could be a combination of, trying to bring in some experts to share models that work in other places, but it also, I think, just convening providers, the universe of providers together and sharing, experiences and what you're doing could be very helpful. I think it has been helpful in these sessions to identify strategies that work and maybe could be replicated. I talked about the centralized enrollment system and whether that's at the LEA level or the state level, helping the LEAs to think that through, because they're, right now they're having to navigate, help parents navigate the process. And we've certainly heard from parents who have had great challenges. Scaling up alternative pathways, both for teachers and teaching assistants to meet the new blueprint requirements. And then the meeting the high quality standards that are in the law under the blueprint, and particularly trying to help private providers to be able to accommodate students with disabilities more. So, and then, so those are the big buckets of technical assistance that we thought we'd put forward, and then we would definitely like to hear other thoughts, or, I'm guessing they're all urgent, but I'm guessing the first and the third maybe are the most urgent. So whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and clearly that has been, I think, reinforced on multiple instances in the chat, that it seems like really numbers 1 and 3 on this bulleted list are areas where there's a lot of concern, some angst, or areas of challenge, and where we could use some additional support.
Absolutely.
Shall we go on to the next steps?
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is just what we're going to do. It's not on the slide, but what we're going to do based on the discussion in this session is revise the graphic again to reflect, potentially reflect additional tasks and subtasks and even objectives that we want to put into the graphic or the comprehensive plan itself. And also the comprehensive plan will include issues that the AIB, just to be very clear with the public and everyone, ongoing implementation considerations that the AIB will be really focused on, and making sure that they're keeping their eye on those critical issues. And then the draft plan that's released in mid-October will reflect these whatever additional changes are made, both to the graphic and other places to reflect the feedback.
Very good.
And then next week we have the same, we're going to do the same thing for pillars 3 and 4.
Yeah, I really just wanted to kind of elevate and thank, really everybody who's on the call and the public in general, because as you can see, from the kind of white cells in the implementation graphic, we were really taking the feedback that is provided and all of the knowledge and insights and expertise from the individuals on these calls in order to continue to build out and modify these implementation graphics to make sure that we are elevating concerns and making modifications within the kind of bounds of the legislation, so that the implementation the implementation plan document is more thorough and more robust. So, just real appreciative of everybody who has been on these calls and has helped to contribute with their comments and questions and thoughts and ideas. Should we go on to pillar 2 at this point, or do you want to take a break?
Let's take a 10-minute break and let's come back and get pillar 2. If any other questions from the prior pillar, if not, we'll take a 10-minute break and then we'll go to pillar 2.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess at 2:40 we'll come back then.
Yeah. Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, Rachel? I can't hear you.
Yes.
Yes, somehow or another, somebody turned off my video and I can't restart it.
Oh.
Oh, now they're asking me to start it. So let's see if
There
that.
you go.
Okay, there I
All
am.
right, there we go. I think we have everyone back except Mara. But we can, I think, get started when we're ready.
About ready?
Yep.
I can't seem to, can you see me?
Yeah, we
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't know what's going on with my video here either.
We can see you.
yeah.
All right, okay.
Sharp Ike.
Okay, let's get started then. I think we're getting ready to go to the next pillar, Joe. So why don't we proceed to that immediately?
Sounds good. So we are now shifting over to Pillar 2, which is high quality and diverse teachers and leaders. We're going to be following a similar format to the one that we just followed for Pillar 1. First looking at the tasks and subtasks that were added based on feedback really over the last 2 working group sessions. So as I said before, thank you to everybody for all of their comments and questions and insights and elevating things, because as you can see in front of you, this is really helping to shape and mold what the implementation graphic looks like, and ultimately will be the core of the comprehensive implementation plan. So we will go through the tasks and subtasks that are added. Afterwards, we'll review some ongoing considerations related to Pillar 2. So things that got elevated that we are continuing to either monitor or think about. And then finally looking at some potential areas for technical assistance. But I guess at this point, I'll throw it over to the staff to just walk us through, starting with 2.1. What are the tasks and subtasks that got added based on the community and public feedback over the last 2 working group sessions?
Sure, thank you. I think most everyone who was also on when we talked about Pillar 1, but just for those who perhaps were not, I will very briefly describe the pillar graphic. And so we have a similar graphic in this format for each of the pillars. And we've been over the last 2 rounds of working sessions building these out, and it incorporates the requirements in the blueprint law, as well as things that perhaps are not specified in the law, but were part of the commission's final report or reports, and or things that have come up as part of this input and feedback process that should be added to the plan, even if it was not specified in the law. And so just starting at the top, 2.1 is the first objective under Pillar 2. And that is recruit and maintain a high quality and diverse teacher workforce. And to the right of that, you can see the timeline, which begins in fiscal 22, which is the baseline year. Although there are, when you see a back arrow there, that means that provision was actually began being implemented prior to fiscal 22. And there are a number of them that did. Right here, we don't see any stars, but if there's a date in the law by when something has to be implemented, that is indicated in the timeline with a star. If the date was not in the statute specifically, but is either an assumption or just a reasonable, expectation, potential expectation, because this needs to be ultimately approved by the AIB, then it will have a yellow dot. And the yellow dot means that it's not, that date is not specifically in the statute. And then starting with 2.1.1, this is the first task under the objective 2.1 of recruit and maintain a high quality and diverse teacher workforce. And all of these objectives, and we'll go through them, are all designed to achieve the goal of pillar 2, which is to have a high quality and diverse teacher workforce and school leader workforce, which then supports the even bigger goals of the blueprint, which ultimately is, for nearly all students to be college and career ready by the end of high school, and as many as possible by the end of 10th grade. And so the dark green is associated with the objective, and this will follow as we move through. The next shade of green is related to the task, which is here, 2.1.1, implement a statewide marketing campaign to attract high quality and diverse teaching candidates. And then below that are what we call subtasks and subtasks, which are essentially the really making sure that we're providing the specificity that exists in the law or in the commission report around how the objective or the task and it is expected to be implemented. And then in white are the items that have been added since the last version of the graphic. So, and these are available on the AIB's website. And Graham, if you could put that in the chat again for folks who joined later. I don't know if they can see the whole chat. Maybe they can. And so with that, I think we could start walking through it.
Can I ask you too, Rachel, unlike pillar 1, there are aspects of the timeline that are still, that haven't been, that don't have arrows or dots on it. Can you talk through that a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. Emma, can you go back to the graphic? So for a number of the addition of items that have been added, you see with the white, you see that there may not be a timeline expectation yet. And that was partly something that needs to be discussed or determined. And in part, we have wanting to consult with MSDE because particularly in this first objective, a lot of it is MSDE, falls to MSDE to implement. But for example, under 2.1.1b, which says, MSDE was required to establish a diverse steering committee to, and then below that, that includes faculty and student representatives from historically Black colleges and universities and other institutions of higher education. That requirement started back in fiscal 2019. And so to the extent that, the steering committee does exist already. So the task that says below that the steering committee needs to meet at least annually, I think in this case, it would be reasonable that should start right away. And so we could put a yellow dot in fiscal 23 and then an arrow, meaning that it would need to happen every year.
Understood.
And same below that, process to solicit feedback from LEAs regularly. So, again, that's a question of, is that something that the expectation would be that should begin in this current year, next year, so fiscal 23, fiscal 24. And so those kind of judgments just need to be made. And we did want to get some feedback from MSDE on that. But all of those things for the draft plan will need to be filled in.
Very good. Thanks for the clarity.
Sure. And so I think if we just, Emma, if you just kind of scroll down, just so folks can sort of get a sense that we have added quite a bit based on both feedback and just sort of trying to drill down further into the into what's required to implement the blueprint. And then I think what we'll do is, rather than sort of walking through this, we'll come back to this when we talk about the career ladder. But I think maybe we'll go to the slides now because it summarizes a little more neatly what's been added to the graphic as a result of the input and feedback of the groups. And so the first objective that I was just describing, 2.1, a number of provisions have been added for MHEC, the Maryland Higher Education Commission, related to the Maryland Teaching Fellow Scholarship. And in previous working sessions, we received a number of comments around applicant, the number of awards that have been made thus far, and wanting to make sure that the funds are being utilized. The mandated funding for this scholarship program is increasing to, I believe, 8 million in fiscal 23, and ultimately it increases to $18 million. And that's a mandated funding appropriation. And so that's a good chunk of money that is available to support students going through a teacher preparation program, and we want to make sure that it's being utilized. And so that is the first two items. And then we also had a lot of discussion in previous meetings about diversity of teachers and staff in the school systems, and also in the teacher preparation programs themselves. And there was a suggestion that the diversity reports that the LEAs were required to submit this year under the blueprint, it was a one-time reporting requirement, that they should submit that annually. And so we have added that as a task, as part of the comprehensive plan, which means even though the statute doesn't require them to submit a plan every year, under the blueprint comprehensive plan, and the expectation is that they will submit that plan every year to the AIB. And particularly there was discussion about having the LEAs include reasons why teachers and staff are leaving the school system through some sort of exit survey or feedback. And then there was also discussion about, and I think Superintendent Chaudhary even talked about wanting to MSDE to begin to collect more data from the LEAs around teachers and teacher vacancies, so that the data was consistently being reported across LEA. And so there was some discussion about whether there should be a statewide exit, common exit survey that all of the LEAs would use to identify reasons why teachers are leaving the classroom or their school system. So those have all been added to 2.1. If we move on to 2.2, this relates to the increased rigor of teacher preparation programs and also licensure requirements. And some of this will sound very familiar because it is similar to some of the challenges that the early childhood providers are having. So the first item here is the state should support the development and scaling up of pathways for paraprofessionals in school systems to become certified teachers. So sort of the grow your own model of increasing the supply of teachers. And then under below that relates to the teacher collaborative grants, which are something that were funded again, I think beginning in fiscal 2019 under some of the what we call the Bridge to Kerwin legislation, that essentially the teacher collaborative grants are intended to really provide pilots or models for potential ways to implement the various pieces of the new blueprint requirements around teacher preparation. And that includes new induction programs that sort of follow new teachers further into the school system. And then also the new professional development system that is required under the blueprint, and the career ladder. And so there have been a number of grants that have been awarded, and the teacher preparation work group has actually convened a couple of times now and heard from some of the grant recipients about their findings and whether the models are replicable. Many of them are at a very small scale, and so the challenge of how to scale them up and replicate them is really important. But there's still funding available for the collaborative grants for another couple of years. And so we have heard in the teacher preparation work group that a number of higher ed institutions had challenges with having their grants approved. And so it was just a question of sort of making sure that the grants that are being awarded are, that the funds are being utilized really. Mm-hmm. And the last item there relates to in 2.2, there's a whole section of the graphic and of the blueprint law that requires the teacher preparation programs to offer competency to ensure that their teachers demonstrate competency in particular areas, which include, and this is in, for anyone trying to follow along, 2.2.2b1. And it relates to basic research skills, differentiation of instruction, assessment of student learning needs, cultural competency, restorative practices, and effective classroom management. So essentially defining, what that means in terms of what the expectation is that students will be able to demonstrate as a result of those various requirements.
Great, thank you for taking us through those, Rachel. A couple things that have surfaced in the chat. The first is a comment from Cheryl Boast on exit interviews. She basically says that exit interviews are good tools, but would suggest partnering with unions to help administer, since employees are less likely to be honest with an employer as to the reasons why they are departing. And then she said previously in Baltimore County, jointly, the LEA and the local union paid retired counselors to conduct exit interviews and second-year returning teacher survey, and they got good participation and great data. So, I don't know what the mechanism is for facilitating these exit interviews, and I don't know if, really what the AIB's role is in prescribing that or recommending that, but it seems like these are, are good suggestions, and was seconded by some other folks in the chat as well. And then
I'll just say, I think that's a great idea. And I know that at least nationwide, that's, a lot of the exit interview survey results are done in conjunction with NEA and AFT.
Right. Really great comment by Sally Murik, who's basically elevates the importance of not only growing paraprofessionals into teachers, but considering ways to increase the bench for qualified para educators within the school systems. And I think as clearly as a former practitioner, our para educators were critically important to the day-to-day operations in the school. And to be honest, like, our school would not have been able to run efficiently without them. They're extremely valuable members of the staff. So figuring out ways to not only create a pipeline for teachers, but create a pipeline for para educators is very critical.
That's a really good point, and it also addresses Thornell Jones, who asked if there was a plan to backfill for paraprofessionals. So absolutely, that's a really good point. We need to build the bench on the paraprofessionals as well, so that as they upskill, there are folks coming in to take their place.
For sure. And then a clarification question from Cheryl. She says, did I say there will be items incorporated in the comprehensive plan that are not in the blueprint, but were in the Kerwin Commission report?
Yes. So in some cases, some of the details around what the intent of the provision in the law is not in the law, but it is laid out more clearly primarily in the 2019 interim report that had a lot more of the detail there. And the blueprint law does actually incorporate the report into the blueprint. So as sort of a reference. So you can see what we've added. And so, it's nothing that the commission didn't agree to.
And then another comment from Cheryl says, the shortage of paraprofessionals and those in pre-K need tuition reimbursement to meet new standards.
So the tuition reimbursement is absolutely there for pre-K. The mechanisms and the funding, the mandated funding is there. For paraprofessionals, I'm not sure, but I think not.
Yeah,
so something we should look at.
Yeah, and it seems like, Rachel, just based on these conversations, like our 2 slides from now, the things, kind of future considerations and things to keep an eye on and monitor, we probably should look at adding that.
Okay.
Keeping an eye on what we need to do in order to, especially if we're making a big push to try to, bring some of these para educators into teaching positions, there needs to be a mechanism in order to support additional para educators, filling those spots. Let's see what other comments I see. So Christina says, I'm hopeful that LEAs will have the opportunity to show how we are using the Maryland Leads grant funds to move our workforce, our work forward through tuition reimbursement for para professionals, MOUs with institutions of higher education, et cetera. So I think all of this is really important, and we're very fortunate to have MSD as a partner in this, and really trying to support cutting edge practices and building out systems that align optimally with what we're trying to do in the blueprint. And Janine says MSDE dollars must also be made available for more staff who wish to become pre-K paraeducators and may not already have. We need to expand our workforce to expand more classes to full day.
So Janine, and then you went on to clarify how CDA are associates. And so I will just again, say that there is funding in MSDE to provide tuition reimbursement for staff who are pursuing the CDA or associate's degree.
So a quick
Agreed.
question to follow up to that is that there are existing pre-K paraeducators who will access that fund to apply to get the CDA or associates. But as we are continuing to expand to full day classes every year, once we meet that requirement for the CDA, in order to generate new staff and recruit new people, we're going to have to start perhaps putting some other people through that process to start getting their CDA. So is the fund also going to cover those people? Let's say there's a third grade paraeducator or someone in childcare and they're interested in becoming a pre-K para, but they're not in pre-K right now. Will the fund also cover them as they're sort of, as we recruit and bring them in process? Because every year as we expand, we've got to have more pre-K staff who meet the CDA. So that's all. I know it's
Gotcha.
an expanding group of people. Thank you so much.
That's a very good question. And I want to double check because I don't want to give the wrong answer. So we will look at that. Okay.
So I think we're ready to go on to the next set of tasks and subtasks that were added based on the feedback. So just if we could go on to 2.4 and just talk a little bit through, there were a lot of things that were added based on the educator career ladder and
yes, there were. And I was actually going to suggest that we go back to the graphic now.
Sure, yeah.
Because there was a lot that we added.
Yeah, and we apologize to everybody that on your screen this is probably extremely tiny, but as we have said a couple times, you can go to the website and download these graphics, and they are being continually updated as we get closer to the release date of the draft plan, and even then we'll go through and update them based on feedback and the public hearing and additional outreach until these graphics are finalized for the December 1st release.
Exactly. And so you can see here in 2.4, objective 2.4 is to establish a new statewide educator career ladder and professional development system. And then 2.4.1 relates to support for teachers to pursue and receive and maintain their national board certification. And really what we did here is just add more detail that is in the law around what is required by that MSDE is required to do, and also what the LEAs are required to do. So we previously, had that MSDE would hire a national board coordinator to direct the program. What we've added below that is that this coordinator will work with the local national board coordinators, and that MSDE will develop and implement an information campaign to raise awareness of national board eligibility and support pathways among existing teaching workforce, including the national board eligibility requirements. So we're really just sort of fleshing it out. And then similarly below 2.4.1b, which says LEAs will select local national board coordinators, and that could be either each LEA or or they can have regional coordinators in which makes sense in parts of the state. Eastern Shore again comes to mind. And then below that, you can see what we've added is that the local coordinators will organize the delivery of the support program, collaborating with teacher preparation programs and nonprofits in their jurisdiction to support teachers in pursuing and obtaining national board. They'll also work with the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards, which runs the program, and the teacher unions.
I would also say, I think we also anticipate this being a potential area where there will be implementation assistance. So, that will have surfaced best practices, other states or districts that have a system for, laying out what it takes to get nationally board certified, what the process is, a structure for mentoring for peer mentors that have, been able to get more teachers, in particular teachers from underrepresented populations, through the national board certification process.
Joe, Rachel, do we have any targets in this?
We do not yet. That is sort of part of the next phase of the conversation of, building out the plan. But at some, I think one question is, would there be a target for, well, let's go to can you scroll to the right, Emma? Because you can see that for all of these, pretty much all of them, the yellow dot indicates that the expectation is that they will begin to do this in fiscal 23. So for me, what that would mean is that there would be a national, MSDE would have a national board coordinator, the LEAs would select their national or regional national board coordinators, and they will start to build out the support structure for teachers who are pursuing national board. In terms of targets, in terms of sort of, by what year you will provide a certain amount of support and serve a certain number of teachers, those kinds of targets, those are the kind of things that we need to be thinking, the AIB needs to be thinking about, the LEAs and MSDE need to be thinking about. And I think one question is that something that we establish, for the initial comprehensive plan, or do we focus?
I'm not need to do it for the initial one. Now that I think about it, given what you just described, but I think going forward, we should have some outcomes or targets that we're shooting so that we can measure the effectiveness of all of this, so that the bottom line is, if we're doing all of these things and our numbers are not moving, then it's clear what we're doing is not working.
Is not working. Yeah. Exactly. And so just to sort of build on that, for the next board meeting, staff has been working on identifying expected or intended outcomes of the blueprint at the very high system level, overall, and then by pillar overall. Yeah. And then the next, after we talk about that on the 29th, then the next step would be thinking about what intended outcomes and targets to set for each objective. So the highest level there. So like it would be 2.4, which is, well, it has a lot under it. So that.
Okay, we don't deal with it now, but at some point, maybe going forward, we need to think about that question about targets and outcomes on that.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. Do you have a question, Bill?
Yeah, Pamela Callahan has an excellent question. And she says, if we have feedback that might be helpful to the conversation about how to build out these subtasks with target dates, where and how should that feedback be submitted?
That is a fabulous question, Pamela. And we have a Google form that everyone is invited to fill out and share any feedback that that you don't share here in the chat. You're also welcome to type it into the chat. We do go back to these and use them as notes for us as we're doing our work. But Graham, could you put a link to the Google form in the chat for everyone?
Absolutely. Just one moment.
Or
I'll put it in
Rachel
there.
just did, actually.
Thanks, Rachel.
And it's also posted on our website somewhere. So maybe Graham, you could let folks know where to find it on the website. Thanks. So then the next, I think if moving along, 2.4.2 is the career ladder that LEAs implement a educator career ladder by July 1st of 2024. And you can see that we've added a whole lot of detail below. There's a lot of white that really is taking what is specified in the law and really putting it all here so that there's a shared understanding of the requirements and what is actually in the law that is required. And then just if you go to the right, you can see that for the timeline, there is a star under the first item, which relates to the development of the career ladder. It's essentially beginning in fiscal 22, and it must be completed by July 1 of 2024. Yeah, that's right. But essentially, so basically it has to be done in fiscal 24 and implemented beginning in fiscal 25. And so that is what the timeline reflects. That for all of these new items that we've added that are required in the law, you see a star beginning in fiscal 25 for all of them. And then the line with the arrow indicating it will continue to be implemented. And so just sort of working our way down through 2.4.2a, which is the career ladder is made up of 4 levels in accordance with state requirements. And beyond the state requirements for the career ladder, it is subject to collective bargaining. I don't think we can make it much bigger, Barbara. I'm sorry, but you can download it.
Yeah, Emma just made it a little bit bigger. So.
Oh, good. Okay.
So thank you, Barbara, for the feedback.
And then below that, so what we've now laid out are the 4 levels of the career ladder. So level 1 is your certified teacher. Level 2 is teachers who either have national board certification or are pursuing a master's degree, or I should say pursuing national board certification or a master's degree. And then level 3 are teachers who have a national board certification or the master's degree if national board is not offered in their subject area. And that also would include assistant principals who are either national board certified or have their professional administrative certificate. And then level 4, which is the kind of highest tier on the teacher leadership track. And then below that is a whole lot of additional detail around each level of the career ladder for teachers, moving from lead teachers to distinguished teachers to professor distinguished teachers. And then for principals, moving from a licensed principal to a distinguished principal. And professor, I think that's there, distinguished principal. And you can see or distinguished principals, I'm sorry. Percentage, and then the last item, not last item, but under level 4, talks about the percentage of teachers who are professor distinguished or distinguished principals may not be more than 1% of the total number of all teachers. So what that is really trying to say is, at the highest level of the career ladder, the number of teachers and principals who would be at that level will be relatively small. And then as you move down the career ladder, the numbers within each level and each tier will be larger.
Could I go back for a moment? Because the thing that sort of the fly in the ointment here is the collective bargaining process. Because you have two concerns that I would see, one of which it would certainly impact the pay that we've talked about. Secondly, it would also potentially impact compression. If these things are not in some way coordinated. And I'm not sure whether or not we've thought through enough the potential problems that we see, because people are going to go up or down on the ladder based on their motivation, the encouragement to do so, and how effective it becomes. And if those two things are in some way not efficiently coordinated, it sort of could potentially impact the entire purpose. Am I making that clear? Compression.
Yeah.
You have essentially salaries, no matter what you call the ladder, no matter what you describe it and you give the name of the professional title. One among other things, and probably the most important one, would be pay. And so you could have a fairly high title in terms of where you stand on the structure, but if your pay is compressed based on what has happened in a collective bargaining situation, then it undermines your purpose. And maybe I'm seeing a problem that I'm overanalyzing here. I'm not sure.
So are you?
Now you started off mentioning the collective bargaining process and what it has to be collectively bargained. And I'm saying that there's a connection between that process, collective bargaining process, and other steps in the ladder. They could be impacted by how the collective bargaining, unless that in some way is adjusted or coordinated in some form or fashion.
I think it absolutely has to be coordinated. I mean, because the LEAs and the teachers unions will be collectively, and the school boards, will be collectively bargaining both the career ladder and beyond just the career ladder, salaries and compensation for teachers. So
they collectively bargain on some of these higher positions.
So the statute lays out the minimum amount that teachers who are on different levels of the career ladder have to be compensated. Beyond that, it is subject to collective bargaining. So they could certainly, if they could reach an agreement to provide more pay, they can do that. But they can't go below the minimums.
Yeah. This is this is a challenge because in my experiences, compression became a very strong deterrent in many ways to what we like to do at the local level. Because we collectively bargain only with a certain portion of the workforce. Others were in professional positions. And once you establish and change those that were bargained for, we constantly found an additional problem of having to, in some way, form, or fashion, to adjust the other ladders that were not collectively bargained in a way that avoided the compression and disincentives and other things that came as a result of it. That some people were almost willing to go back to a lower position because they lacked the responsibility, but they got almost the same pay. So, I don't know.
So, yeah, I mean, I think sort of jumping ahead here, but we have been planning to convene a career ladder group to start to talk through the challenges and sort of, help think through how the process could work. And we're planning to try to do a convening similar.
Yeah, no, I
to the-
have a meeting set up coming up. I'm just outlining some of the challenges here that I see, so it could be fairly transparent with people who are listening in today and believe that what they see on paper here is something, even if it's implemented appropriately, could work as intended. And I'm laying out a problem here that I see that's going to be an ongoing challenge for us going forward. We have some additional questions and comments, so why don't we deal with those? Because that's a good part of it. Joe?
I mean, just through this conversation, there's been several comments associated with this. So Charlemar says this is, you're spot on, this is a real concern. She says, I've already heard that in some cases, teachers will make more than principals. In some cases, that's already correct. Tara Down says, this looks that way. There was a question that was elevated in the chat that I think we have brought up before, just around if we could have an updated graphic or visual of the career ladder available. I know that at some point you had posted that. I don't know if that's still on the website.
I did ask Mike Hirschenfeld to post the graphic in the chat. I think he's working on it.
Got it.
We're working on it.
Trying to figure out how to add a picture to the chat. It looks like it wants me to put it in like a Google Doc and then share a link to that, but I'm trying to figure out the best way to do that.
Got it.
Thanks, Mike. I can't help you.
Cheryl Boast has added to the chat saying the entire ladder is part of our collective bargaining, which includes all salary scales and levels on the ladders. All of these job titles stay within the certified teacher units. Compression of salary steps is bargained and increases lifetime earnings. Tear Down says this looks that way, definitely will have an impact. There's a comment that says, an issue I see in determining lead teacher, distinguished teacher is subjective and most likely will not be uniform over the 24 LEAs.
So can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Like address some of these?
Sure.
So going backward.
All of them are collectively bargained, all the way up to the principal portion as well?
Sorry, can you say that again, Mr. Chair?
I said all of them are collectively bargained? Because that would help to eliminate some of what I've just described. So I thought at one point a few, which ones?
They're all collectively bargained. They're not all part of the career ladder, but they are all
Yeah, okay,
collectively bargained.
yeah. There was a
Cheryl,
question raised a moment ago about saying that there was not a challenge based on what she described, because they were all collectively bargained. Could you go back to that question, Joe?
Cheryl Bose says the entire ladder is part of our collective bargaining, which includes all salary scales and levels on the ladders. All of these job titles stay within the certified teaching units. Compression of salary steps is bargained and increases lifetime earnings.
I just want to make sure that's correct, that all of it is collectively bargained.
Cheryl, can you come off mute and address this more, please?
I can.
Thank you.
Yep. When you're looking at the lead teacher distinguished, they all are in our bargaining unit. They're teachers that are teaching, and they fit within the bargaining unit that we negotiate the career ladder and the steps and how many steps. And then there are administrative units that negotiate the administrator steps and salary, which would take the other administrative part of the salary scales and collectively bargain that portion. Is there any other clarification?
Say the last part again.
No, so we have administrator units throughout the state that then negotiate the salary scales for the administrators, and they have the responsibility to do the career ladder for the administrator part of the career ladder.
But is that the same collective bargaining for the other components of the people in the scale on the ladder?
So the teacher unit, like for example, I'll pick Prince George's County. PGCEA represents the certificated staff bargaining unit, and so they would negotiate that salary scale and that career ladder steps just like they've always done. AFSCME represents the education support professionals who are not impacted by this. And then if there was an administrator unit, the administrator unit would do theirs. Sorry.
That's what I meant, is that you would have them collectively bargained, but they're not collectively bargained together. They're collectively bargained separately.
You mean they're not in the same unit? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
That's what, okay.
That's the problem. And so if they're bargained for separately, then you run into the potential problem. We have that in lots of places where they're collectively bargained, but they're dealt differently because they're different collective bargaining units.
It depends on where you are. Someone put in Charles County, they're together, but it's state law on how you can bargain for what unit.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anything else, Joe?
Yeah, I just want to turn it over to Rachel to provide some additional kind of insights or context on this question.
Sure. So, so I think one thing I want to say is part of the goal of the blueprint and the career ladder in the blueprint is to well compensate teachers for their work and provide for opportunities for teachers to remain in the classroom, which we want, but also have pathways to earn additional monies and have additional responsibilities without having to leave the classroom and become an administrator. And so it was specifically designed to do that. And so that you know, that is going to have an impact on other professionals in the schools, but that was exactly what it was designed to do. And for principals, it's another challenge, which is to ultimately, by not until 2029, require national board certification for the principals as well, which would then kick in to increase their salaries similarly to comparably to what the increases that that teachers get. But it's laid out, all of the salary increases that are associated with becoming national board certified and moving up the career ladder for teachers and principals are all specified in the law. So those are minimum requirements of every career ladder in the state. Beyond that, it is subject to collective bargaining. But they can't collectively bargain it lower.
So Pamela has elevated, I think, an important question, which is, she says, is it accurate to infer that the career ladder will become the salary schedule and the step and lane system will eventually sunset?
If it were working really well, and it would be amazing if that happened, because that would mean that we would have an entire, teacher workforce of national board certified teachers and teachers with master's, really, really high quality, well qualified teachers. That would be amazing, but it is optional. So teachers will have the choice of whether they want to pursue national board certification and go on the career ladder or remain or not.
This question was from Jane. It was much earlier in the chat, but should be pretty straightforward. She says, can you help us define pursuing a master's degree? Does that mean an educator is enrolled in a master's program?
Enrolled in an approved master's program. And I think I saw another comment. I think it was John.
John, yeah. John said, can a requirement be that the master's be directly connected to the original certification and not just any master's?
I think, and I think Emma's trying to find the language there in the law. It's not any master's. I mean, it doesn't have to be tied to your original certification, but it also cannot be a just like a combination of courses that get you a master's. It has to be a defined program that meets certain requirements.
Okay. Cheryl says, no, this was in response to the conversation before. No, not all employees will be up in the career ladder. There are so many other job classifications not included in the ladder.
Yeah, no, I thought the question was just about teachers, not all employees. Yes, obviously the career ladder is only for educators.
Yep. Kevin Michael asks, now that the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards has removed the 3 years of successful teaching prerequisite requirement, could a new and beginning certified teacher immediately move to level 2 of the career ladder if they begin pursuing national board certification?
Yes. I think that's correct. They still cannot earn national board certification, which is what actually provides the additional salary until after 3 years of successful teaching, but they could start pursuing national board sooner, which has implications for the covering the cost of the national board fees for teachers. So that could affect our cost estimates of the cost of reimbursing national board fees might be a little low given the change.
Got it. I'm trying to piece together a couple questions and comments from Barbara Dubik, but it might be better, Barbara, if you just come off a mute and are able to ask your question in person.
Yes, I'm here. Hi, I'm just wondering if a lot of the, because we've been serving pre-K for a long time in my childcare center, not so much in a public school, but a licensed childcare center. And I've had employees that have worked with me for a long time. They're some of the best teachers I've ever seen, but they don't have degrees. So I don't know if that's a thought in the process of what is happening. And the other thing I asked was, when you say other professions, would that include like psychology majors or social service people?
Yes. Folks that are not classroom teachers or principals.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So if you're not in the classroom, if you're in the classroom and you have, let's say, a degree in psychology and counseling, would that make you qualify for a classroom teacher, or does that not qualify?
that's a complicated question. There's a definition of
I'm a complicated person.
certified. No, it's all complicated. But if they're a certified teacher and they are teaching in the classroom at least 50% of the time, then yes, they could qualify.
Okay, but if they're not certified, they don't qualify.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And let me also add that the certified pre-K teachers are also eligible for the career ladder. So they could pursue national board and earn the additional salary incentives.
Very good. Yeah, thanks for your question, Barbara. I think since we're starting to run a little short on time, let's go back, Emma, to the slide deck. And let's just review some of the ongoing considerations. Now, even from this conversation, I think we've added a couple other things that we really need to keep our eye on and look at. But I think just initially from the 2 working group sessions that we've already had, these are some of the things that have surfaced that didn't actually result in changes to the implementation graphic, but are things that we are keeping our eye on and looking at as, potential things to examine in the future. So I'll turn it over to you, Rachel, to kind of just go through some of these ongoing considerations. And as I said before, thank you to everybody for their participation, their questions in the chat, because based on that, some additional things will most likely get added to this slide as things that we need to continue to keep our eyes on.
Yep, absolutely. So the first really relates to the Teaching Fellow Scholarship and sort of keeping an eye on whether the scholarship and its criteria are actually leading to the funds being utilized, and that it's actually helping to create a larger and more diverse teacher pipeline. The next bullet is, very broad, but, very important, which is the diversity of the teacher pipeline all along the pipeline, from the prospective teachers or teacher candidates, the certified teachers who are coming out of the programs, and also the teacher preparation program staff themselves, all disaggregated by LEA and by race. The next item is, similar to the conversations around Pillar 1, are the obstacles to students and adults becoming teachers, and particularly for educators of color. And one piece of feedback that I thought was a really important one to incorporate is moving towards providing credit for experiential learning for folks who have many years of experience but don't have the degree. And that maybe in part speaks to what Barbara was asking about. The effectiveness of the new teacher induction programs and professional development systems that are going to be implemented by MSDE and the school systems over the next few years. Disparities, both race and gender, teachers who pursue national board and achieve national board. Hopefully the intent of the national board support program is to, provide those supports so that we don't see those disparities. And then we've obviously today talked on the shortage of high quality and diverse school leaders, administrators, and I think this is where we would maybe want to add paraprofessionals as well. And then, really important issue is the assignment of teachers and leaders to low performing schools and concentration of poverty schools, so that we really, make sure that we've got our best and most, diverse teachers who look like the kids in those schools, helping our schools that are having the most challenges.
All right, very good. I wanted to surface one comment in the chat. This is more global comment coming from Buzzy. And he says,
I did see that.
Yeah. What is the relationship between the AIB and the MSDE comprehensive plans? Who is doing what to flesh out detailed plans? Do you know the level of detail that will be in the MSDE comprehensive plan?
So MSDE doesn't have a comprehensive plan. AIB is responsible for developing a comprehensive plan for implementation of the blueprint. And then MSDE is responsible, or in the law, is responsible for drafting the criteria that will be used to consider whether the LEA's plans that they have to submit to the AIB and MSDE are recommended for approval. And so MSDE will and has actually submitted draft criteria for the AIB's consideration. And then MSDE itself will be developing its own implementation plan that is responsive to the blueprint comprehensive plan.
I'm going to keep looking through the chat, but if we can go on to the next slide, which is the potential topics for technical assistance or implementation assistance.
Sure. So they're pretty obvious, so nothing, no surprises here, but we're going to continue to work with the teacher preparation work group and convene all the teacher preparation program folks from around the state. The school systems are participating now, as well as MSDE and MHAC and PSTEB and others, and continue to be talking about the models for how to successfully implement the new requirements from the blueprint. And then I mentioned earlier, convening, a large group to do similar to what the teacher preparation work group has been doing, to develop, to really talk about the challenges that are already maybe being experienced in terms of developing the career ladder and collective bargaining around the career ladder and models for successful implementation. And then another big piece of the career ladder that we haven't spent as much time talking about in these working sessions is the additional non-instructional time that teachers will have, and not just teachers on the career ladder, but all teachers will have, to collaborate with their colleagues, look at data and interpret needs of students, identify the needs and the interventions that they need, and then also provide some of that individualized or small group instruction during the school day. And so what does that look like? How does, what sort of, what's the impact on staffing of schools and the structure of the school day? Even, really getting down to the nitty gritty, probably thinking about how teacher of record is defined, because if you're going to have, at least two, possibly more teachers moving in and out particularly at the elementary school level during a school day, so that all the teachers have this non-instructional time, then we're going to have to think about what teacher of record means, and how that is structured. And then I'm sure there are lots of other potential topics of technical assistance. And so if there are others that, are particularly urgent, it would be really helpful to hear about those.
Got it. A couple recent submissions in the chat. One is from Shamoya. She says, the AIB earlier expressed interest in hosting a public hearing on MSDE's approval criteria, especially given that MSDE hasn't made those public. Will that still occur?
So Mr. Chaudhary will be at the board meeting on September 29th. But we're still talking about, what is presented on the 29th publicly. But ultimately, the draft criteria for success will be it will be part of the comprehensive plan. And so we will have draft criteria that are available in October, and that will be available for public review and comment, and for receiving feedback during the public hearing, but also that Google form that we talked about earlier. Something like that is going to be available to take feedback on the draft plan, including draft criteria, even separate from the actual public hearing.
Got it. Flora says, I think paraprofessionals are very important to success. What about directors leading childcare programs that have public pre-K classrooms? Are there any plans for compensation for directors in childcare centers that are accredited level 5 and have public pre-K?
That's a very good question, Flora, that I cannot answer.
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely want to defer to MSD on this in terms of whether the higher excels level affects childcare director compensation. I know there are bonuses based on Excel's level. So I don't know if that actually provides more money for the childcare director salaries or not. So we'll follow up on that.
Got it. Yeah, and I think that covers most of, I think, what I have seen in the chat. Flora says $1,500 per year bonus. I guess that must be the bonus that's given to those who reach level 5 on Excels. Barbara says there are bonuses, but it's for individuals. There are bonuses.
Isn't the child care director an individual? Wouldn't they also? Yeah. Okay.
Got it.
Okay.
All right. Let's go to the next and I think final slide, just on next steps as it relates to Pillar 2.
So similar to Pillar 1, we're going to take all this feedback and incorporate pieces of it into the actual implementation graphic, and also update and revise the list of topics to monitor, and potentially technical assistance. And then that will be incorporated into the draft comprehensive plan that will be available after October 13th. Sometime, the next week is when we should be making the draft comprehensive plan, including the draft criteria, public.
All right, very good.
And then I will just, on Tuesday, we're going to do the same thing again for pillars 3 and 4. And then pillar 5 is going to be part of the meeting on September 29th.
Okay, our next meeting.
Tuesday at 1 p.m.
Okay. Joe, are there any other comments?
No, I think we, there's clearly a lot of comments. We didn't get through all of them, but I think we did a pretty good job summarizing the majority of them. I think what was put in the chat that we didn't get to discuss in the public forum, the staff will kind of round up and we'll go through and look at the responses and make sure it is represented in the documents that are created. So just really appreciative of everybody who participated in the meeting, and especially those who were in the meeting providing questions, comments, insights, helping one another out in the chat, elevating really important questions and helping us think through this very complicated piece of work. So yeah, and hats off to Rachel and the staff for all of your work. I mean, it's just been great working with you, and just really appreciative of your dedication and all your thought and commitment around trying to get this right.
And also thank you, Joe, for taking both lead positions today. I really appreciate your hard work and the efforts that you made to make sure that we stay on track here. I know a lot of this sometimes is tedious, but as I indicated in the earlier components of the program today, a lot of what we're doing now provides the meat for the gist of what we're going to do for the comprehensive plan. There's no mystery about it. A lot of what we will have will come out of what we're doing now, and you will see that in a later format, but it's not something that will be different from what we're discussing in these various sessions. So thank you very much. As I indicated before, we want to be transparent and get as many people involved in this process as possible. Anything else you want to add, Rachel?
Nope.
Okay. All right. See you next week.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.